Today's scripture is a little ominous, to say the least. I mean, I know I would not want to be promised the same cup during the same baptism of Christ. That is a hard call. Now, if I should end up there, yes, that's fine, for my prayer is thy will be done, but my prayer is not let me know ahead of time. Once you're in the situation, it's a little bit easier. The rest of Jesus' apostles started to grumble and to get angry at the son of Zebedee for making such a request. Again, proof that the apostles don't actually get it. They're kind of missing the whole point. I'm actually surprised Jesus didn't stop them when they started. When anybody starts, we want you to do what we're going to ask of you, your first reaction is, well, that depends. What are you going to ask of me? You could end up painting stripes in a parking lot.
Yes.
And thanks, Jeff, for helping out. That was great. So finally, once again, Jesus reminds them that those who will be first shall be last, and those who are last shall be first. And so today, with the Bread for the World theme, I wanted to explore who are the last, who are the least, maybe in our own town here or in the surrounding area. So I picked two populations that Bread for the World gives us some statistics on. Here in our own country, more than 5.5 million indigenous people from more than 560 nations live in the United States. Many are part of federally or state recognized tribes. They include Native Americans and Alaskan Natives. Indigenous communities live in pueblos and in tribes and in communities, in rural reservations and in cities across 33 states, including Alaska. 34 indigenous communities have some of the highest hunger rates in the United States. As a group, 1 in 4 Native Americans and Alaskan Natives are food insecure, which is defined as not having regular, reliable access to foods needed for good health. Hunger among indigenous communities is a direct result of poverty and of systemic inequities through racial and gender discrimination. Systemic inequities, which means this is done intentionally. Now, it may not have happened today, it may not have happened yesterday, but in our history, the way we have put these together, it was intentional. While the United States has a poverty rate of 12.3%, indigenous communities have a higher poverty rate of 25.4%. Not every tribe has a casino. And not every casino shares their profit with every tribe. The poverty rates are even higher among female-headed households at 54%. And some reservations, almost 40%. Indigenous populations are more likely to lack access to nutritious food. 90% of U.S. counties with the highest indigenous populations, which is 40% or higher, are also among those with the highest food insecurity rates. Many reservations are in rural food deserts, requiring indigenous people to travel to cities, sometimes more than 100 miles, to purchase food. Many indigenous people living on reservations lack employment opportunities. Indigenous people are twice as likely to be unemployed as the general U.S. population and more likely to hold low-wage jobs with few or no benefits. Many indigenous people who find employment earn below poverty wages. 1 in 3 Native American and Alaskan Native households live on less than $25,000 a year. Due to racially inequitable policies, indigenous students are more likely to attend low-resource schools with less support for their future. And therefore, they don't get the education they need to work their way up and out, which is supposedly the American dream. Hunger damages health in turn, and poor health makes it harder to become food secure. Those are just some of the statistics. The continuing struggle over land, as well as historic racial inequity and trauma, has strained the relationship between tribes and federal government, so they don't trust each other. They don't even know how to have conversations around how to make things better. Now, all these statistics come from Bread for the World website. And it truly breaks my heart. It's no accident that many of these lands that the United States has left to indigenous people are purposely set apart in barren and rural areas. One just needs to look at our history. It is a wonder we do not all walk with our heads hung in shame. Mm-hmm. You know, I lived in Palm Springs, which is, quote, an Indian reservation, but to make sure that the Indians couldn't make any profit, they scattered the land by mile checkerboards. So there wasn't a good section where they could build, where they could make an income. Of course, the government made a mistake there and gave them a hot spring, which eventually made them one of the richest tribes in the United States. And unfortunately, they don't share it with other tribes. While hunger and poverty declined among African American people in 2017, food insecurity is still not dropped enough past this year to match the increase in African American populations. This is another community that suffers. If you've ever been in an African American neighborhood in the inner city or urban areas, it's hard to find a grocery store.
Yes.
You can find McDonald's. You can find Burger King. You can find fast food and junk food left and right. And maybe a mom and pop market that has a few scant shelves, but to find a grocery store is rare and few in between. 560,000 African Americans are still food insecure compared to 2015 numbers. While this is lower than 187,000 additional African Americans who fell into hunger in 2016, the targeted policies that prioritize racial and gender equity need to be implemented. We need to look more at how we construct and how we serve communities around us. The higher rates of poverty and hunger among African Americans are a direct result of systemic inequity through racial and gender discrimination. Again, much of it was intentional. Developed in a history that is clouded in dark and is clouded in shame, but we haven't done anything to change it. While the United States has an overall poverty rate of 12.3%, according to the U.S. Census, within the African American community, the poverty rate is 21.2%. It's unacceptable. The rate is even higher in African American female-headed households at a 30% rate. Only 8% of African Americans live in areas with a supermarket, compared to 31% of the white community. Almost 94% of the nation's majority African American communities are food insecure. African American leaders on the local, state, and national and international levels continue to do their part to fight hunger and poverty in their communities. But it's still not enough. We need to partner. We need to find better ways to build stronger communities. So that was a lot of statistics. But it brings home this issue of hunger. People are hungry, living in food insecure areas where, even here in the United States, though we think of Bread for the World as a global project, which it is, it does serve us here and our communities here in the United States. Some of the first century churches started their worship with an actual dinner that led into the Lord's Supper. But in the church at Corinth, some people ate and drank to their fill while other people went hungry. And St. Paul tells them that if they ignore the hungry people in their midst, their sacrament is sacrilege. You can't be connected to God and ignore hungry people. Worldwide, there are about 800 million hungry people. In these families, many of the children die young, and people don't have enough energy to be fully productive. In our country, 1 in 6 children lives in a home that sometimes runs out of food. The intermittent and relatively moderate hunger that usually characterizes hunger in America cripples our young children for life and causes health problems for adults as well. I think the most important thing to know about hunger is that the extent of hunger is declining. We are making a difference. The number of extremely poor people in the world is less than half of what it was in 1990. In the United States, the number of people in poverty has roughly been cut in half since the 60s. So we have made progress, and progress is possible, but there's still work to be done, just by the statistics I just shared with you. We can always do more. The great liberation from material misery that is underway is like a biblical exodus, and an experience of our loving God in the world. And God is asking us to be part of it, to help move it forward. We do that with our participation with the Redwood Empire Food Pantry. We do that with gas cards and food cards for people who call up the church in dire need. Some of you have made your careers of service to people in need. Some of you give more of your time than anyone could ever ask for to support those in need in our community. We do that through the United Church of Christ on a national level. And today we are asking once again to make the last first on this Bread for the World Sunday. Reverend David Beckman tells of 2 stories that relate to bread to the world. And his first story that he shared these last year at a sermon. It talks about Pat Pelham, which her story starts almost 20 years ago, as he explains, quote, "She was a young mother in Birmingham. Her prayers one morning, she felt a strong call to do something about widespread hunger in Africa. And she didn't know what to do because she had young children. Her husband had a job that was in Birmingham. Her pastor suggested that she gets involved with Bread for the World. At that time, many of the poorest countries in the world were struggling with impossible debts, and some church groups were organizing a campaign to get some of that debt reduced. Birmingham's member of Congress was a conservative Republican named Spencer Backus. He was chair of the House Committee with jurisdiction over that issue of world hunger and nations in debt. At my suggestion, quote, Reverend David Beckman's suggestion, Pat and several of her friends from her church came to Washington to meet with him. Surprisingly, they actually convinced him, and he became a champion on this issue. And over the next several years, they organized in lots of ways to give, and they gave Backus credit back at home for the work he was doing. Kind of a one hand washes the other situation. You help us make the world a better place, and let the people know that you did. Well, that's kind of nice. Across the country, people weighed in with their members of Congress, and the U.S. government eventually supported international debt relief. The recipient governments were required to use the opportunity to take actions to reduce poverty, and a number of African American governments dramatically expanded primary education. Over a 10-year period, the number of African children in school increased by 50 million. A whole generation of girls learned to read and write, add and subtract. About half of the countries in Africa have since that enjoyed continued progress against hunger and poverty, just by writing a congressman and paying him a visit. The other story that Reverend Beckman shared is that of Dave Miner. He says, Dave Miner is an anti-hunger activist in Indianapolis. He has worked for years to involve other people in service and advocacy for hungry people. This year, when he was speaking, 2017, President Trump and Congress are pursuing an unprecedented attack on virtually all the U.S. programs that help hungry and poor people in our country and world. The budget cuts that were proposed at $2.5 trillion were from programs that help people of limited means in our country and internationally. $2.5 trillion is a big number. So Dave decided to focus on just one proposed cut in the budget of the House of Representatives. They wanted to cut $150 billion from SNAP, which many know as food stamps. So Dave calculated that this one cut would translate to the loss of 50 million meals for kids, seniors, veterans in Indiana alone. So he gave up 50 meals. That's 16 days of not eating. One meal for every 1 million meals that the House budget would take away from kids, seniors, and veterans in Indiana. His fast received press attention, especially in Indiana, and he was able to share his concern directly with the state governor and one of the senators. Dave's story and his fast dramatizes for all of us just how dangerous the current political assault on hungry and poor people is. Now, I'm not asking you to fast for 16 days. I'm not even sure I can fast for 16 hours. But you can let your members of Congress know that you want them to keep our country and the world moving toward the end of hunger. You can connect with Bread for the World by going to their website, bread.org. You can see more statistics on other populations here in the United States and around the world on just how change is being affected and lack of change is affecting others. And like I said before, today we have a special collection, and I'm going to let Paul speak to that as well during the time of offering, and I just hope I haven't stole all his thunder. But it's important to know where our leaders stand on hunger. You know, you can write and ask your congressperson, tell me where you stand on hunger. And sometimes you might get an answer. Or you could go to their website and look up specific issues and see if they're working on them. It is essential that our voices be lifted up outside of the halls of the church. Because our job is to be the face and the voice of Christ in the world. And Christ said, feed my sheep. You don't have to donate today, but you could sign a letter. You could make a phone call. And you can always pray. You can pray for our world leaders to become wise and generous. You can pray for those who are active and to keep up the energy and keep up the spirit. It is possible to end hunger by 2030. Now, by hunger, we mean getting people the essential nutrients and basic food they need. We don't mean a steak on every table. But it takes a spiritual shift in our world. It takes that movement of something that's much bigger than us. And it takes all of us to do it. And a lot of that can only be achieved through constant, steadfast prayer. My prayer is always, Lord, thy will be done. And I pray that we will all take time to make ourselves last, even if it's just for a moment, so that somebody who is least or lesser may be lifted up, so that others may be first. Amen.